we started off with a diagram, and we started off with a calculation policy that we were working on as a group of schools in the Wath area, and we wanted that calculation policy to fit the new curriculum, but fit in a way that was meaningful to the children and for the adults that were going to be working with the children. And we came up with a really simplistic policy that had concrete and pictorial leading to abstract through that policy, but was based on a diagram. It was a haylock diagram that has concrete, it has visual, it has abstract, but it has language in it as well, and how all those things were interlinked. From there, a couple of us went to see then a Shanghai lesson, which was really interesting, but we couldn't quite pick out how that at that point would work in our context. A few months later, prior to the sort of introduction of mastery, I went to see a school and saw same-day intervention. And when I saw same-day intervention, I saw a sort of a way of all the children working towards one end, towards age-related, and challenging the children that I felt could work in our context. And it worked around the concept of there being a sort of introductory piece of learning, a bronze piece of learning, an age-related piece of learning that was called silver, a bit more challenge with gold, and then a challenge activity. And during the time from Easter to around the middle of June, in the Year 5 class that I was working in, we trialled that in one class at school. And we kept asking the children how they felt about it. The children loved it because they loved that aspect of, if they were finding that they were really confident that day, they could go for silver or go for gold, or indeed go for challenge.
So can I just stop you there, and can you explain why that was different to what they were doing before?
Prior to that, there would be three levels of differentiation, but those groups were preordained. So you'd have a low ability group, you'd have a middle ability group, and you'd have a high ability group. When we started to explore this concept, there were no groups.
Right.
And it was down to the children's self-assessment and understanding of how confident they were feeling with the learning that day. And that, it totally lifted the glass ceiling in terms of aspiration, and in terms of talking to the children, they were fantastically positive. Because of that, the following year, the next September, we rolled that concept out across school. We took part in, as we rolled it out across school, we took part in the roadmap programme to develop staff confidence in delivering or beginning to deliver a mastery curriculum. And what we've worked on since then is involvement of key people, champions in school, to then refine what we're doing to gradually build that idea of mastery, because we're talking about a 10-15 year programme, and we're gradually piecing that together, but it all came back to that diagram and that starting point for us.
When you decided to introduce it, which would have been September 2015, was that across the school, foundation to Year 6?
We started in Key Stage 2.
Right.
Key Stage 1 staff felt they needed a bit longer to think about it because of the age of the children and making choices and maybe putting a few less layers in there. So Key Stage 2 started in September as they had more time to think it through and to distill their thinking and narrow things down a little bit, but also get the children ready. Key Stage 1 then started after Christmas.
And your different levels of challenge and your different activities being available to all children, do you find that the children are a good judge of what they should be doing, or do you have children that are unconfident and won't try things that you feel as a teacher they are capable of?
The vast majority of children are really sound on this, and what it's actually done is to help give the children an even sharper understanding of their own skills and what their next steps are, which is great. There's 2 other groups of children in your class, and there'll be different numbers of that depending on which class, of some children who sometimes aspire a little bit too high that aren't quite ready for that, and you just have to adjust down. And then you've got other children that will aspire a bit lower, and you just need to guide into, well, actually I think you can really do this, should we have a go at this one together? And once they get started, then they realise that they really can.
So that's part of your role as the teacher?
Yeah, absolutely. It becomes part of the children's journey. If I think going back to 2 years when we started, there was bigger groups of each of those. But now, going forward, not very often do teachers have to do that. The children are really sound judges of how they do it. In infants, it works a little bit differently. The teachers teach bronze, very quickly move into silver, and the children then decide between bronze and silver, so that choice is narrowed slightly just to make that choice a bit more age and stage appropriate.
Can you talk about any structural changes that you've had to make, for example, to the length of lessons or to the timing of lessons?
In terms of the lesson structure, it's not a million miles away from what happened before, but it's just subtly different. People still have mental maths first, that still happens in the maths lesson. Then the teacher would teach their introduction that would include bronze and silver and gold learning, with the challenge sort of idea and reasoning dripped into that for all children. The children would then have a go at either bronze, silver or gold, but for quite a short, sharp activity, about 10-15 minutes only. After that time, the teacher and the children together will decide who succeeded with silver, the age-related activity, and gold, slightly twisted version with a bit of intelligent practice of age-related. And if they're really confident with that, the children will move on to challenge at that point. There might be some children that feel like they need to explore silver age-related a bit longer, and then there'll be a group of children that the teacher brings together in a group to do same-day intervention at that point. And it depends on that learning journey which group of the children that could be. It might be some children that need a complete rebuild, that have got some significant gaps, but very often it's children that just need a little bit of a tweak and a little bit of individual input to take them to be successful with that age-related learning in that instance. After the challenge in same-day intervention, then there's a plenary to bring everything back together, but that plenary focuses on the challenge to give all children that chance to experience that reasoning and that problem-solving aspect to the learning.
Right. So your same-day intervention takes place in the lesson, every lesson, but with different groups of children depending on who needs it.
Yeah,
Right?
we explored various possibilities with same-day intervention. We tried, at the start, we tried it in lesson, we tried it out of lesson, and we tried pre-learning as well. We found pre-learning really difficult to manage because getting a time where the teacher could work, or the teaching assistant, with the children prior to the math lesson on that day was really tricky. And when we took same-day intervention out of the maths lesson, although it gave the teacher that breathing space type of thing, it did mean that sometimes things cropped up that meant it didn't happen. And the very concept of same-day intervention that we liked was that the children could go away from that maths lesson thinking, I can, I've succeeded. And if same-day intervention didn't happen, then it took that opportunity away. So that's why we brought it back into the maths lesson, because for the children it meant that they had that opportunity to go away from the lesson thinking, I can, ready for the next lesson.
Yeah. Okay. Can you tell me about your classrooms and whether the layout of the classrooms changed? Are the children still sitting in the way that they did sit before, and how do teachers decide who sits with who and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it was really liberating in that regard. I think liberating for the teachers and liberating for the children, because it meant you didn't need groups, because children were choosing on that day what was appropriate to them and what level of learning they were confident to have a go at and start to work on. So it meant that people could pair children together in totally different ways. So people paired them together in terms of sometimes supporting different children, sometimes in terms of challenging different children, and sometimes in terms of just really good role models for particular children that would help them work together. That's how it worked in Key Stage 2. In infants it worked in that way in the first instance, but what infants are exploring now, because primarily their teaching is on the carpet and then the children go to the tables for their activity, is they're sort of thinking about a 3-section idea to their main teaching input. And the teacher during the main input will have the age-related children just from the previous day in the middle. They'll have a space where the fast-grasping children, if they're ready to go and the teacher will check, will start off when they're ready. And then a section where of desks and things where the teaching assistant can work with children that maybe had a couple of gaps or need a bit more input from the previous day. But that's very fluid. There might be then, during that teaching, the teacher saying to children that are in that age-related section of the carpet, I think you're ready now, off you go. But those children might have a go at a couple of things and come back and say, I'm not quite ready yet, and that's fine. There might be children who started off with a teaching assistant who needed a bit of extra input, who the teaching assistant then says, I think you're ready, you go and join them, or from the carpet where the teacher perceives that somebody's missing some key bits, the teaching assistant then pulls them together. So it's meant the classrooms are very fluid. In the infant classrooms then, they don't have maths places. They sit down depending on what they're doing to start with, and that may change during that journey of learning. So the classrooms have been much more of sort of for everyone, and everybody's place is anywhere in the classroom rather than it being sort of almost areas of the classroom. So it sort of freed that up really.
So in terms of being in charge of a limited budget and thinking about rolling out mastery in your school, what sort of financial decisions did you have to make with resourcing and that sort of thing? Can you talk us through that?
We saw the key resources being the staff. We felt that we wanted the staff to be absolutely confident to deliver the concept of mastery as we saw it at that point, because it would be an evolving concept for us as pieces of the mastery journey were pieced into it. So we began last year with a roadmap to mastery, and all teachers and HLTAs took part in that to build up that core base of staff understanding of what does this look like, but what does it look like in addition, what does it look like in subtraction, and all those kind of ideas, and what are the likely misconceptions that I might arrive at, and how might I deal with those, how might I build it back so I can build that sound basis of learning that mastery is about, taking it away from tricks and things that people might have used in the past. And then this year, what we've then tried to do with that is for the children, for the adults that have not been part of the roadmap last year, they've then had catch-up sessions that I've run, and I've been training to be a roadmap trainer myself. So I've taken the training and then put it into our school context in a way that's meaningful for them. And in the second year that we're in this year, we've then looked at how we can sort of distill our initial thoughts of mastery, because we're still only at the very beginning in the second year, that are more appropriate to our school context. So we've got somebody who's taking part last year in teacher research groups, and then this year is part of a research group that's very much been around the idea of assessment in mastery, and particularly around what does greater depth look like and what behaviours are part of greater depth, to support staff with that, but also to think about if these are the greater depth behaviours, how do we teach in a way that encourages these greater depth behaviours. And then somebody else has been training to lead teacher research groups this year, so they start to think about the key ideas that have been talked about locally that we can then fit into our context. So it's been very much about the staffing in terms of resourcing, but also because a key part of it is around concrete and visual resources. How do we, within the constraints we've got, make sure that those resources are available? And we've tried to do that as far as we can, both in buying the resources, but making sure they're organised in such a way that people can find them quickly and they're interchangeable between classes.
Okay, and can you talk a little bit? You've got a teacher who's been working with the local primary mastery specialist. That was last year. Can you talk a little bit about the effects that that's had on the school and the input you've had there and support?
Yeah, it was really interesting because it was a group of similar teachers from a range of local schools, and that they engaged in that sort of lesson study concept that meant they got to engage with mastery learning in different contexts, which was really good. And the great thing about it for that staff member was it was about affirmation. It was really about, I really do understand this concept, and I know this concept's going to evolve and we've got a lot to do with it, but I'm really confident with it. And it meant that person then went into a maths research group this year really confident not only to take part in it, but also to take a strong part in those sessions and represent what had happened in this school, and think about what had happened in other schools, and really be confident to say, that's great, I'm not so sure about that in our context. So it's meant that they've fed into our school ideas in a way that they may not have done, because they've generated the confidence that they had from the affirmation of the teacher research group the previous year.
So tell me about the pupils. Tell me what effect this has had on them, and what sort of feedback you're getting from them, and what you notice as a teacher in the way they approach maths now.
I have to say, when we first started it and I ran the trial in year 5, and after the first couple of days of looking at who chose and who succeeded with different pieces of learning, I felt awful. And I felt awful because, like many teachers at that point, I had groups of lower ability, middle ability and higher ability pupils, and the amount of as they would have been then, lower ability children who succeeded with the age-related activity and even the challenge activity was quite considerable. And it meant very quickly that the children's perception of maths started to shift, because they started to think, hang on a minute, I really can do this, and I can aspire to this, and I can succeed. It also meant, from the children's point of view, that the children that formerly were working in the higher ability group, they enjoy the challenge aspect that they now had within mastery, the regular challenge that was happening each day, but it also meant that they felt almost less comfortable in what they were doing, which was good for them, because it meant that they were spurred on and that they had something that was almost pushing them each and every day and challenging them each and every day, and they really responded to that. The children really loved the aspect of physical resources being part of the learning journey right through school to understand concepts, and having links to the visual resources that then went to the abstract when people were ready. They loved that. And they also liked the fact that as we moved into this year and we've understood the concept a bit more, that learning moves on in smaller steps. And what we've noticed as teachers have become more confident in planning in longer units of work, that means each lesson's a smaller step, the amount of children in the same day intervention groups in classes has gone down significantly. And to encourage teachers to do that, we changed our assessment system. So the assessment system, particularly in the autumn term and the spring term, seemed to have less emphasis on coverage. So it encouraged teachers to feel, yes, I can go to the depth I need to, and I can make sure those fast grasping pupils get the opportunity to really go deeper with this, but I also give the other children the opportunity to consolidate so they understand those concepts. So I've really built this on concrete, I'm not building on sand.
Did you have to do any work convincing those children that would previously have been considered high ability and thought that they were doing harder work? Did you have to do any work convincing them that what they were doing was hard, even though maybe the concepts they felt were basic?
Yeah, I think particularly in terms of, I think the thing we have worked on most in that area is looking at multiple ways and then deciding the best way, and being able to explain which is the best way and why is the most appropriate way to that calculation, and can it be different for this calculation, how can it apply to that, rather than solely getting an answer. That's been the hardest challenge with the fast grasping pupils, because previously they wanted to get to an answer, and what we've been working on is, yes, you can get to an answer, but what's your route to the answer and what's the best route, and it's almost focusing on the process rather than the outcome at the end, and that's been something that we've worked on quite a lot with them. But with all the children, tying what we've done in mathematics and in other areas of the curriculum to a concept of growth mindset has really worked, because it's been around that idea of effort and what does effort look like, and how do we encourage the right kind of effort in our classrooms. In each of the classrooms you'll have seen an effort meter that teachers refer to during the lesson, and where that effort meter goes. And teachers are trying to use, which is a hard thing to do sometimes, teachers are trying to use praise in relation to efforts. They're talking about children that are being brave, they're talking about children that are being resilient, they're talking about children that are using different strategies, rather than the achievement that children have made, which is a hard adjustment as a teacher, but that's part of what we've linked into it. And that's been really successful for the children, because it's meant the sort of blood that runs through everything in school and what we're trying to do with mathematics fits together.
Right. Okay. And what about SEN children? You've talked about intervention for those that haven't quite got it that day, but do you have any children that just can't access the normal lesson, and how do you provide for them?
Yeah, it's been really interesting because in that concept of everybody can get to age related, we wanted a sort of stepping stone towards, because we felt for some of our children in many of the classes that age related at this point would be a step they're not quite ready for. That's why we put that bronze layer in that was slightly below age related. That meant that if there were lessons or a run of lessons where they really couldn't, there was something where they could succeed and was something that was appropriate to them as learners. The things that have really helped them is that they now aspire in terms of their mathematics, but sometimes they do get to that age-related activity, that silver activity, and it means that because they sometimes can, that germ of an idea is sown in their head that really makes them believe, I can. The small steps of learning have really helped them, because it means that things aren't moving on too quickly, they've got time to consolidate, and the emphasis on practical resources and visual images have really helped, because very often that's exactly what those children need. So the mastery curriculum is kind of tailored to those ends, but as well as the in-lesson support, we still make sure that if there are children with particular needs and those needs are shown in mathematics, that they have separate intervention programmes in the afternoon that are additional to their normal mathematics learning.
How have parents reacted to the changes? Have they noticed? Have they commented at all? Have you had to do any sort of PR work in telling them what's going on?
Yeah, I think what we've tried to do is try to keep parents in the loop. And in the very beginning, we sent out quite a lot of information, but never a big amount of information in one go. I always believe for anything, really one side is enough for anybody. And as Mastery's evolved, we've sent out a series of, but less so latterly, more in the first year, of documents to parents to say, this is the type of learning that your child's going to be engaging with in mathematics, and these are the sort of things they might talk to you about, and this is why we're doing it. And we've done that in school, but also in foundation stage. We've done that with supertising. And supertising is the idea of being able to recognise a quantity without needing to count. And most people can do that up to a value of 4. You'll be able to do it higher, particularly if it's in something that's recognisable, like a dice pattern. And that was the project that our foundation stage engaged with when the rest of the staff were doing roadmap. Foundation staff did roadmap as well, but they also did the supertising project as something that we thought would lead into and be something that was linked to mastery, but something that would be really important to the children in foundation stage. And what they started to explore was the idea of, right, okay, so you can recognise that as 3, so what does 3 look like? And they started to explore concepts of 3 could be 1, 1 and 1, but 3 could also be 2 and 1. And it started to lead into that idea of number bonds not being just about number bonds to 10 or to 20, but what about your bonds to 3 and your bonds to 5 and your bonds to 7? All those things that are important to children in terms of their number skills and their fluency, but also the conceptual understanding that is based around that. And we sent out regular updates to parents about supertising as it evolved, so a beginning and things from there, and then posted things on a research and development part of our website. And we made either termly or half-termly sort of additions to that. So if things had changed or moved on, or we're exploring particular concepts of supertising, then parents had an update as to what we were doing and why we were doing it. And in each of the classrooms, in the class files that are available to anybody that goes into the classroom, there's a document to do with mastery and there's a document to do with supertising, so that all that information's there. And it's been really interesting with supertising, because we're starting to notice the children that had supertising as nursery children in what we call F1 have come up to F2 with some really fantastic mathematical skills. So in terms of impact, in only 1 year, that's been really strong.
Yeah. Can I ask you some more about impact?
Yeah, you can.
In terms of your results and what you see the impact of being across the school.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to think about. I mean, our maths results, if we talk about results, have remained strong. They were strong prior to mastery, and they've remained strong after that. And it's quite early to talk about the impact of mastery, but results are a little bit temporary in that they're a marker point in that time. Whereas if we think about the children, we're thinking about a child that's going to be a mathematician for the rest of their life. So I think it's more pertinent to talk about the children and the impact on them, and the impact on them has been significant in terms of their confidence, their ability to sort of think, there's a challenge there and I might not have got there straight away, but what different strategies can I pick, and what would be the most appropriate strategies to pick, what would be, so they become more resilient in those terms. They've started to think totally differently. They've started to explore mathematics as not solely about one answer, but being about multiple routes to that answer, and which is the best route to that answer, and why is that the best route. So they've started thinking totally different. And in terms of aspiration of all children, the impact has been enormous, because lifting that glass ceiling that we talked about has just meant that all the children at one time or another during that learning journey get the chance to think, I can. And that's been enormous, because maths is one of those areas where if we were to talk to many adults about it, many adults would have the perception that I can't do maths, or I struggled with maths. And that's one of the barriers that we felt most important to break down, because we want our children to believe that they can, and mastery aligned with growth mindset has been fundamental to start breaking those barriers down for the children.